Well, tonight is the penultimate session for this study of Hebrews. I'm not sure I really like ending with session 13. But oh well, right?
Call it 12 and a half.
Yeah, we'll call it 12 and a half.
I was in the car listening to a Christian radio station once on Friday the 13th. And this announcer said, "Don't worry about the 13th. Jesus is in control of the 13th." So I haven't worried since.
That's true. Don't worry about 13. Yep. Anyway, so tonight we're going to be in chapter 11 and a little bit into chapter 12. And then next week we'll finish up. And so, but we need to start with chapter 10, verse 39. And instead of reading all of chapter 11, we're going to take it in chunks and try to do it that way a little bit. So we need to look at verse 39 of chapter 10, because it is a little bit of a bridge verse again, a transition like the writer of Hebrews has done all throughout the book. And so he says in verse 39, "We are not among those who shrink back and so are lost, but among those who have faith and so are saved." There's that word faith that's going to occupy really all of chapter 11 and in a way chapter 12 as well. So let's quickly turn back to Hebrews chapter 3 and remember what we saw there. This idea of shrinking back or not following through. So what happens in Hebrews chapter 3 that we spent some time looking at?
How Jesus was greater than Moses.
Right, and the people are on their way to the promised land, and what happens?
They lost faith.
They lost.
Right, they in that sense they shrank back. They were afraid to go into the promised land, and so they were disobedient. So when we're going to spend a little time tonight examining the facets of the meaning of the word faith, because I think, and you all can correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I think we have some boundaries around faith. Like, I'm not sure, and you all again correct me if you disagree with this, I'm not sure people connect the word faith to obedience, right? And if we look back at chapter 3, then we see that the people who don't make it into the land, the Sabbath rest, it's because of disobedience. They don't really believe what God has said about his presence and activity with them as they go into the promised land and have to face those giants, right? That's what they were afraid of. So the idea of shrinking back then that we see here in chapter 11 is an echo, you might say, or a little bit of a memory from chapter 3 and what we saw there.
Steve?
Yes.
Isn't the disbelief the result of the lack of faith? I mean, isn't that the action that is the result of them losing faith?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, so disobedience is the result of not believing God's word, right? And we see that in the garden in Genesis chapter 3. I mean, this is the age-old problem that the Bible refers to as sin. So as I mentioned a minute ago, let's just spend a little time thinking about the nature of faith, what faith is. So that gets us into the early verses of chapter 11. And I'm going to read from New Revised Standard, and then I'm going to ask a couple of you to read your versions. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. That's verse 1. So My version, the New Revised Standard, uses assurance and conviction. What does your version use?
Now, faith is confident in what you hope for and assurance about what we do not see.
Okay, so confidence is the first one and assurance the second one. That's interesting. So in my version, assurance is associated with the first word there. We're gonna look at these Greek terms because this is one of those moments where we have a particularly challenging translation matter at work here. So, okay, who else has versions?
The NIV says, now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see.
Okay, being sure. Hey, Larry, would you tell me the copyright date on that NIV? Because the NIV, a couple of these versions, that's why I put NASB 2020. So like there's an updated version of the NIV.
Well, I'm sure this is not it. This is from the Serendipity Bible. It's
Okay,
84.
Sorry?
No, I'm sorry. It's 96.
96, okay, yeah. Okay. Okay, that's the NIV.
That one.
It's the same as,
Faith shows the reality of what we hope for, and it is the evidence of things we cannot see.
Okay, reality and evidence. Now this is, so what we have here, when we think about the word faith, there's a subjective side to it. Faith is an attitude or a feeling, a response that we have, right? Something that we're experiencing. But the Greek term, which we'll look at in a minute, one of the interpreters that been looking at says that word reality, that's more objective, right? It's more on so what we're talking about here is a reality that just isn't visible to the naked eye. A reality. Good. Anybody else?
Yeah, this was one that I memorized when I was a
Okay.
kid, because
Yeah.
the pastor of the church, this was all the time. Substance of things hoped for, the
Uh-huh.
evidence of things not yet seen. And that was just what we knew.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think it had to be King James in those days.
Right. Okay, so the New King James Version, the bottom word there, substance, it uses that word substance. The others, assurance, confidence, so that's the New Revised Standard, the New International Version, and then the New American Standard Version, which surprises me a little bit because I have an old New American Standard Version, right, from the 70s, and it uses substance, but they've updated it to certainty. So they've switched to the more subjective side of things, which I found interesting. But here's the Greek word. It's the word hypostasis. Now, if you've looked into this at all, or if I've mentioned it along the way at some place, the word hypostasis is used in relation to the three persons of the Trinity. Right? And it does mean, I've covered up part of the word with the group here, but it means undergirding reality or substance.
And undergirding reality? Okay.
Undergirding reality. With an emphasis on not mere appearance, right? This is unseen. We're talking about something unseen. So, but the word hypostasis it allows for the other, you might say the other side of the coin with the more responsive human part of it, right? The attitude or the feeling we have that we think of when we think of faith. But really to get at the meat of Hebrews 11, we need to keep a hold of the assurance, the confidence, that's all good, but we need to keep hold of this prior reality. because these people of faith that we're gonna look at are all responding to something real. You know, it's not, I guess one of the reasons I was a little concerned about this is there's a lot of talk about faith and belief, and it's really about, you just have a positive attitude and you stay with it and you keep believing and you keep working hard. We tend to think, I think, of faith kind of in those terms. And if we stay there too much, we're gonna miss what Hebrews 11 is actually saying to us. Is this making sense? Am I making sense?
Well, what you say about how we use the word faith does, because I think faith is positive thinking.
Yeah.
And you don't want to have unpositive thoughts,
Right.
because that's not faith.
No stinking thinking.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, somewhere along the line, after the evidence of things, okay,
Yeah.
is faith is a verb.
Mhm.
Have you ever
Oh, yeah.
thought it that way?
Yeah, oh, yeah, yeah. So in the Greek, yeah, faith, there is a verb form of what we just translate as faith, yeah.
Mhm.
To
But
faith,
it's an
right?
action.
So that, you know, we might say believe there, because again, with English, we get kind of limited options, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, good.
So is faith is believing in an undergirding reality, or faith is the undergirding reality?
No, it's conviction about this, well. Okay, I have to be careful here. I'll say it this way, God help me. Narrowly speaking, faith is the response to this undergirding reality. Right? So the prior reality is the controlling factor here. Now, why is this important? If we think about all that we've studied in this book of Hebrews, the writer has really been doing what I might call, to use a technical term, an apologetic work, right? He's defending the faith as revealed through Jesus Christ, and he's defending and explaining why it's superior to what the receivers of his sermon, some of them are tempted apparently to go back to something, right? They're tempted to shrink back. And so he's trying to show them there's a reality. Christ reveals a reality, the heavenly temple, the city whose architect and builder is God, the house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens, faith then here is a response to that prior reality. That's why the word substance is, undergird reality is good. Undergirding reality is just my attempt to try to get at. The undergirding part is, it means it's, we sense its reality, but it's not part of the normal world that we see, right? This is not, we're not seeing this with our naked eye, so to speak.
Okay, I'm still struggling then with. Is it that is faith hurting reality? Or is,
I mean, if we take, it says faith is
yeah,
the hypostasis, right? So, yeah. So I'm not sure what
I'm getting at?
what you're driving at there, but I think just on the kind of the obvious, yes, it is that. But I'm a little troubled about the implication, that's why.
I guess I'm not really thinking of the implication at the moment. I'm just trying to grasp what faith is.
Yeah.
And is faith itself the undergirding reality? That is faith? Or is faith belief that there is an undergirding reality?
Okay, so I don't love the word belief here because,
Yeah, okay, that's not a good word.
well,
Clinging or relying on or.
yeah. the confidence, that's why maybe it will help to go on to the other
Okay.
operative term
And
here,
if we
so.
know what our faith requires of us and we're not doing it, if we know we're doing things that aren't right, then does that show we don't have our faith? Or does that show we're just saying the heck, I'm gonna do what I want to?
I think it can be a little of both, depending on the situation. Yeah, we can harden our hearts and just disobey, right? We just don't wanna do that. And in other ways, we sort of get tripped up by our desires, our worries, and we're not really just willfully choosing. We're still responsible, but it's more feeling based rather than just will based. Sometimes we just bow our necks and just don't want to do it. Yeah. Okay.
Would you expand the window so I can see who else is present here and check them in at the bottom, so they're a
Oh,
little-
sorry, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so it's the assurance of things hoped for in my version, the hypostasis of things hoped for. The conviction. Again, conviction sounds like it's an attitude that I have. So we're on the subjective side. We don't disagree with that. We're not throwing it away. There is a subjective part of this. So again, conviction in the New Revised Standard, assurance in the New International Version. Here, the NASB kind of switches back to the more objective side, proof. And then the New King James is evidence. Now, proof and evidence, right? It's out here. It's not just something I'm kind of feeling and conjuring up. Okay, what other words might one of your versions use there? Anything different? I'm curious about Forrest. I'm curious about your version, because that sounds like the Common English Bible or the.
It's the NLT
New Living. Okay, that's good. What does it say?
on which
Verse, the second half of verse 1.
It is the evidence of things we cannot see.
Okay, evidence. Yeah, all right. Yeah. Okay, so the Greek word is elenkos or elenkos. And again, this kind of double-sided thing. It's proof, it's demonstration. Actually, there's another word that we would translate it in English as pragmatic. Right, so that goes along, I should have put that in there, I'm sorry. That goes along with elenkos. So proof, demonstration, evidence.
So what is the hypostasis? I thought that was Greek.
It
was
is,
the first word.
that's the first,
Assurance.
Hy-
The
hypostasis.
evidence of things.
yeah, the assurance of, or
Got it.
yeah, so,
Got it.
right. So this is
Substance.
these words, that first part is the hypostasis, the substance of things hoped for. And the next one is the proof or evidence or assurance or confidence or conviction of things not seen.
On the message.
This is a pretty robust, rich, I think, and in some ways challenging view of faith. It's a lot more. Forgive me if I'm sort of beating on this point a little bit, but this view of faith is a lot more than the usual way we think about faith, which is something we're kind of working up in ourselves. And that's not really, it's not really sufficient for what is being said here. And I think that's important when you look at when we start to look at the stuff we're going to get into now in chapter 11, that definition of faith becomes pretty important. Okay.
Hey, Steve,
Yes, sir.
you have spent time on assurance and conviction, but you skipped over hoped for.
Yeah, okay, so the biblical understanding of hope is a strong confidence based on something you know to be true. Yeah, I'm glad you did this, Jim, because again, we can use the word hope in kind of a weak way. You know, hope is sort of playing the odds a little bit, right? And then hope it works out. That is not the biblical understanding of hope. The biblical understanding of hope is confidence because you know something to be true. Right? So like confidence in eternal life because Jesus Christ has risen from the dead. He demonstrates, he shows that death has been conquered. That would be, so when we hope for what's coming in the future, when we hope for heaven, it's confidence that we will receive heaven, have heaven, make heaven, go to heaven, all that. There's a kind of confidence based on faith, trust in Christ, right? Yeah. Does that get at it?
Yeah, it's a lot different than the way we use it today.
Yeah, exactly. So faith and hope, yeah, you're right. Yeah. Okay, well, let's go on to verse 2 then and kind of carry on with this exploration. Indeed, by faith, our ancestors received approval. That's how my new Revised Standard Version says it. How is yours worded, that verse 2?
Commendation.
Commendation. Okay,
Through their faith, the people in the days of old earned a good reputation.
earned a good reputation, okay.
Oh, wow. King James Version, a good report.
Good report. Any others?
This is what the ancients were commended for.
Commended, okay.
The Common English Version says the elders in the past were approved because they showed faith.
Yeah, approved. Okay. Okay, again, let's see, did I put that? I did. So I'm sorry, I'm gonna collapse the
Drag it out.
just for a second, or do what?
That's fine.
Just drag it up.
Mhm.
This is the word, from this word comes also the word martyr, or witness, or testimony, or testifying, if you want the verb form of it. So the New King James Version gets close to a pretty literal reading of the word. So again, there's just this little extra facet. When we hear the word commendation or approval, commended for, you know, that's a little bit of like an attaboy. But the testimony or the I hope I'm not overdoing this because I'm not an expert Greek scholar by a long shot, but that word, the kind of scholarly variety of opinion about these words and how to translate. I mean, the translators of these English versions, when they run into verses like these with these words that are pretty, they have lots of dimensions to them. What's the best way of translating? And you can see that they kind of have to choose, and sometimes their choice limits it one way, sometimes the choice limits it another way. So, but to me, it's kind of interesting to imagine God bearing witness to the faith of these people, right? God bearing witness, commending, approving, saying, hey, you got this right. You know, again, this is important as we get into some of the details of chapter 11, because as we will see, some of these people face a lot of hardship. Okay? Verse 3, same kind of deal. By faith, we understand that the worlds were prepared. Notice the plural. Does everybody's version use the word worlds in plural?
No, no.
No?
Universe.
Universe?
Universe.
Larry Newton?
Yeah, the universe was formed.
Okay, Larry Swanson?
Mine
Was
says was created.
I just turned it on. They couldn't hear you.
In verse 3, universe, worlds?
By faith, we understood that the entire universe was formed at God's command. That what we now see did not come from anything that can be seen.
Okay, all right, so worlds, plural. The plural part is better than universe, I think. Now, again, I'm just shooting from the hip here.
How many worlds are we talking about?
Well, so I gotta get to my word here. The Greek word is eons. So usually when the Bible talks about world, it's the word cosmos. Or if it's plural, it might be cosmoi, worlds. So we kind of collected all these planets and heavenly bodies and other worlds into a word like universe, right? But the Greek word here, again, has this kind of double or triple meaning. So eons can refer to worlds in a way, but again, when we think of worlds, we're thinking of planets, probably, right? The universe makes us think of planets. And it could be all reality, I mean, but it's still kind of on the physical side, right? And eons, that's why I put eons also means ages. Vast periods of time, almost unmeasurable periods of time. So in a way, these first 3 verses, especially verse 3, can take us back to the writer is gesturing in the direction of God as creator. And everything about reality, save sin or evil, everything about reality, everything is because he created it, right? Now this is, you meditate on this, you think about it, and you start realizing that, the very breath I'm drawing right now, part of God's creation, right? God, back to chapter 1, he upholds all things by the word of his power. I mean, that we can take that in a way very literally, because everything about reality is because God is behind it all. The substance, the reality behind it all.
I have Einstein's equivalency here. Energy, E equals MC squared.
Yeah.
Because we don't see that, but you've got that kind of captures. That what was seen is not made out of what was.
Right.
Was visible. I mean, it's bigger than that.
Right. Yeah, so again, I'm way out of my element here, but the universal constants, these are, they can be reduced to mathematical formulas, but they speak to unseen forces that keep everything working.
Yeah.
Right? So, okay, that's good. And then that really, if we look at verse 6, so now I've kind of jumped off script here, but given this line of thinking, without faith, it is impossible to please God. For
Whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him.
Right. Yeah. And we're not super comfortable with the idea of reward either, because that sounds like we're working to earn something. So we have to stop short of that. But there are plenty of places in the New Testament where, they talk about reward or rewards. Yeah.
Well, in this case, it is for those who would draw near to God. That is their reward, that God is found by those who seek him.
Right. Yeah, that's true. That's true. I think it means a little bit more than that, but that is true. That really is the heart of the matter. But here in verse 3, the worlds were not made by anything visible. So again, faith is recognizing, responding to this reality that undergirds everything, that holds it all together. It also, that reality helps, helps with the idea of purpose, like human purpose. Human life has meaning and purpose because we didn't just think ourselves into existence. This is something an all-powerful God did. Well, and if God thought us into existence, spoke us into existence, so to speak, then there must be a reason for our existence, and that's a good thing, right? Faith. All right. Now this is where I've got to kind of do the flyby. Everything, starting with verse 4, really through verse 29 in chapter 12, which is the end of chapter 12, flows from these first 3 verses. We're going to kind of break this up for obvious reasons, but we just have to keep that in mind. Okay, so here we go now. We're going to break this down. We're going to look at these names, Abel and Enoch and Abraham and, Jacob and Isaac, Isaac and Jacob and Moses, and then some other people. Okay. The writer is using a well-known rhetorical practice. We're going to praise our heroes, right? I'm using the word heroes. In Greco-Roman culture, you want to inspire a crowd. It's a little bit like, we go to a ball game. This easy example for me, if you don't like sports, just bear with me. But you go to a ball game and somebody, 4 or 5 people are being elected into the Hall of Fame. And you get a listing of their great feats. It's that sort of thing, only it's really not about these people. It's about trusting God, right? I mean, it is about these people, but they're examples of something that's really so important that it goes beyond just praising them. But he's using a well-known, well-recognized practice. So then that raises the question, what makes these people who are mentioned, what makes them examples or exemplars of faith? Here we go. Now, just look at verses 4 and 5, and here I want this to be a little bit more discussion. We have Abel, we have Enoch. How are they alike, and how are they different? Don't skip the obvious.
Well, they're different because Abel died.
Okay, Abel died.
And Enoch did not.
And Enoch did not.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
They
Okay.
both please God.
That's
both-
how they're alike. Exactly. Yeah. Linda?
They both pleased God.
Right.
What he said.
Yeah. So they both pleased God. One was murdered and the other one didn't die at all. Okay, we have to kind of let that. Yeah, go ahead.
That's a pretty good trick to do.
Not die at all.
Not to die.
It is. Yeah, that'd be nice, wouldn't it? Okay.
I always thought that was a weird, the use of Abel was a weird thing, because, God commended him and accepted his gift, and through faith, he still speaks, even though he died. I mean, I don't know, it's just like, but he died, like, just how faithful.
Okay, now let's keep in mind the writer's bigger purpose with this particular group of people that he's been trying to encourage and warn them a little bit. Okay, so and we're just warming up here. Okay, so they're alike in that they both please God. right? And they're getting the testimony, God's approval, the testimony, you might say, of God's approval. One was killed and the other one didn't have to die at all. Both are examples of faith. Okay, let's go to Noah now. So 11:7. Skip 6 for a second. We've touched on it, but we're going to skip it. 11:7.
By faith, Noah was warned about things not yet seen, and fully feared, built an ark to save his family. By faith, he condemned the world, and became an heir of the righteousness that is in keeping with faith.
Okay. So we know the Noah story well, but again, thinking about the, a few of the details. Warned by God about events yet unseen. And if you saw the modern movie of Noah, right, people are making fun of him and he's building this ark out, on the dry, and they're making fun of him and they think he's crazy and, right.
That's exactly how we would respond to someone who was doing some harebrained thing.
Right.
But his motive was fear. He believed enough to be afraid.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that spurred him into action.
Holy fear. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So was he being prophetic?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think yes. I think in that sense, you're exactly right. He was being prophetic, even if he doesn't fit the kind of usual role of a prophet that we're thinking. Yeah. But
Well,
again, faith, go ahead.
he certainly received the prophecy anyway. God told him it's going to rain.
Yeah. Get ready.
Yeah.
Okay, now again, we sort of cycle back to this definition of faith at the very beginning, right? It's not just that these are like superhero believer people.
No, not at all. We're not to the bad one yet. So
Right. These are not, they're responding to unseen reality. Okay. So then, how do you think Noah illustrates verse 6 that we've already read?
Well, if he hadn't believed God exists, he certainly wouldn't have gone ahead and built the boat.
Uh-huh.
So he sought God and he believed God existed and he believed what God shared with him, however he shared it.
And so his reward was survival, right?
His whole family.
Yeah, he and his family, and he becomes the the progenitor of all the reconstituted human race after the flood.
So my version says he earnestly seek him in verse 6. Does that mean that Noah was actively seeking, or is that just another a form of that word seek? Because I don't remember Noah seeking God necessarily. God came to him out of the blue.
Yeah.
So kind of after the fact, he seeks him, or wants to maintain relationship. And
yeah, that's a good question.
Why does it say Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord? What does that mean?
Makes a good song.
Yeah, it does, but the reason it makes a good song is because it makes you go,
Yeah.
God knew he would obey.
Well, I'm going off the top of my head, kind of memory there, but where does it say, and what chapter and verse?
Blameless in his generation.
When the people begin to call upon the name of the Lord. this is, I should know this, but I don't have this.
Okay, what was your question? It's chapter Genesis 6, starting with verse 9.
That's where it says, when people begin to call on the name of the Lord.
No,
Uh,
no, it's Noah.
Verse 8 says, but Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. God was going to wipe out everybody, but Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord.
Yeah. Yeah.
To say why, it just says that.
Oh, there, it's at the end of chapter 4. And I'll explain the reason I'm thinking about this verse. So chapter 4 of Genesis, verse 26.
Yeah.
To Seth also a son was born, and he named him Enosh. At that time, people began to invoke the name of the Lord. Now,
Yeah.
the Lord, Yahweh, right? This is not, or Adonai, this is not a generic name for God. This isn't just seeking after some God. This is a specific identification of the God that, that the Hebrew people will meet. Now, I brought this up because although it's very, very, very in the background, there's the hint that there are people who kind of intuitively know that there's really one God, and that, these gods that people are worshiping and all that, not the thing, right? And so whether they're worshiping Yahweh in a way that we would recognize with some kind of well-defined set of practices and beliefs, there is this kind of sense of reaching out for, and maybe, this is my conclusion, maybe Noah is part of the people who begin to invoke the Lord. It doesn't say that, about Noah's life, but I'm just wondering if that might be a connection, and I'm totally speculating, right?
Okay, so chapter 6, back in verse 9.
Maybe I'm remembering.
Says these are generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God.
Okay, there it is.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's go on. Back to Hebrews 11. Now we're going to get into that. Boy, it's going to get tougher. Look at 8 through 12 and then 17 through 22. And once you've had a chance to read them, let's go ahead and discuss more by listing how you see Abraham demonstrating the kind of faith that this chapter is defining for us or describing.
He obeyed.
Okay, he obeyed.
He did not see, he didn't know where he was going, really, but he obeyed.
Right.
He left all that he knew and all that, all that he couldn't take with him, basically, but all that he knew, his family, his friends, he left everything and just left.
Right.
Not very many people can do that. Some
Now-
do, but not very many can.
Right. And honestly, I mean, this sounds a little like wacky to us, right? It's wacky to just up stakes and go someplace. Well, where are you going? Well, I'm not exactly sure, but the Lord's going to tell me. I mean, how would we respond to people like that?
And also
Not very
says,
well.
yeah, he went to live in the land of promise. So
Sounds like somebody that's going to be a Methodist pastor or something.
Yeah, well, yeah.
And he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. Was he looking for a real city? Was he looking for people who thought like he did, that there was a God out there that
Well,
claim then?
I'm not
or-
sure how to answer that, but I think what it does show, I mean, this is a very clear illustration of the definition of faith in the first three verses, right? He's responding. So however God did it, God has spoken. Abraham knows that God has spoken to him and told him to do this. And so the faith then is not just an attitude, it's a response of faithful obedience to this instruction. And again, he's looking into the future, right? There's something out there that I'm pursuing because God told me to do this. But I don't think it's, he wanders around in the promised land and doesn't settle down and
Because he never finds the city.
well,
It's something-
because it's a heavenly, it's not the usual. It's not the usual city, like,
I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
How long he pursued the idea that he was to be the father of generations. I mean, he apparently, that was part of the promise way back when he left.
yes,
And all through this time, and I mean, it was probably close to, must have been 70 or 80 years.
Yeah.
Before
Yeah.
that promise was realized, and it was realized long after it should have been.
right.
I mean, it's just strange that he would hold on to that the way he did, I think.
Well, another thing that I just noticed here, they're talking about a city that has foundations and not a tent.
Right.
Something that would exist
yeah.
permanently.
Stable,
Permanent.
long lasting. So in chapter 12, we read about the unshakable kingdom. Yeah. So not a kingdom that we can just identify with any earthly rule or power. This is something yet in the future. And since we're on this note, just look at the end of chapter 11. Look at verse 40. This verse kind of blows my mind a little bit because as I understand it, so the writer is saying these people, Abraham, Moses, etc., will not be made perfect. They won't be completed apart from us. And I think that extends to us today, right? So there's something, so they're still, in one sense, waiting for the fullness of the kingdom to come in its finality. Well, while they're living the earthly life, that's what they're pursuing, right? They're pursuing this reality, and they're not satisfied with anything less than what God has for them. Okay.
This suggesting that all people had to be made perfect or just some people? I mean, like Phoebe Palmer, for instance, she's supposedly sanctified and this and that. Or is it all people in this case in verse 40?
Well, I think I don't think it's all everybody because the writer has said earlier, there's a possibility of falling from grace. And so
Okay.
like the people who fell in the wilderness, well, no, they're not, they're not in that number,
Okay.
but the promise remains, right? The promise of the Sabbath rest, it remains. And if you have faith, and then if you have faith the way it's illustrated here in chapter 11, that's, there's a challenge to it, but there's also a promise. Because the reality is that God is with us. We're not just doing this on our own. Okay, 17 through 22. Look at how Abraham demonstrates faith there. Take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the mountain that I will show you, and there offer him up as a sacrifice on that mountain. I mean, it's just gut wrenching when we get to that part, after he's waited, like Linda was saying, you know, wait for the promise, decades, 20 years or more. And then they have the child, and now God says, kill him. And what does it say there?
We considered that God was able to raise him from the dead.
Right. Now, reading this Christianly, right, the way that the writer of Hebrews would, God gave Abraham a little glimpse, however partial it was, he got a little glimpse of resurrection. And he believed it. Now, you know, he didn't have to sacrifice Isaac because God provided the ram caught in the thicket, right? But this is how Abraham is demonstrating faith. God is showing him something, reality. He's after it. And he'll do everything God says to do. Now, Abraham was by far not a if we go back and remember his life. And so he's flawed, but still we can see what the writer is aiming at in helping us understand the kind of faith that we all need. And it's, again, I just want to repeat, it's not some kind of thing that we gin up in our own ability, right? This is a response to a gift that God gives us. Okay, let's move on to Moses. Yeah.
Sorry.
Nope.
When the writer of Hebrews is saying that he considered the fact that God is able even to raise someone from the dead, he's saying that Abraham had a reason to believe that in his own mind based on where he was at that time. Right? That doesn't have anything to do with Jesus, does it? I mean, where did that belief come from at that period in time?
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna give it my best shot, right? Because again, I'm not an expert in cultural background, but generally speaking, there was a strong belief in life after death. And every culture, Babylonian, Egyptian, life after death. And there's sort of this shady, unhappy life after death, or blessed, full of pleasure and joy, life after death, but not bodily, right? If I use the Greek versions of this, Hades is this kind of, Sheol in the Bible. Sheol is a place of kind of insubstantial, like shadows and it's a form of existence, but it's not full bodily existence. And so if God is giving Abraham a little glimpse, not the full-blown story of Jesus, but a glimpse of how God will conquer death. And that means if God has the power of life and death, then God can raise. If God tells me to kill Isaac, God can bring Isaac back to life.
And that was part of his faith, that he believed that if he was going to kill Isaac, that he would be resurrected.
Right. Now, again, I think, I could be reading more into it than I should. So not a full-blown picture of Jesus, but a glimpse of
what kind of power
what Jesus would accomplish fully in his ministry. Okay, let's press on to Moses and look at 23 through 28. What?
That verse, he considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt.
Yeah. Yeah, or the Messiah, right? But here, Moses, clearly the writer is saying Moses has prophetic insight into how God will redeem his people. Does Moses see Jesus of Nazareth? I don't think so, but Moses understands that there is one coming who is anointed by God to redeem his people. And in a way, Moses, that's exactly the role Moses had. But there's someone coming with a kind of finality to the work of the anointed one that goes beyond Moses. So again, the writer is telling us, look at the life of Moses. I'll paraphrase. He had a really good living in Egypt. Pharaoh's daughter. He could have been an Egyptian prince of some kind. There's a variety of scholarly viewpoints about that, but he certainly would have had a good life had he stayed in Egypt. Probably would have had a role in government somehow, it would have been a good life. And he repudiated that life to be with his people and then to do what God tells him to do. All right, I'm going to skip down to the closing synopsis because I do want to get us into chapter 12 at least a little bit. And we're almost out of time here. So scan 29 through 38. We see in those first verses, references to what's going on in like the book of Joshua and then Judges, Samson, Gideon, and Samson. And then Samuel and David, so we're into Samuel and the king. So he's kind of doing a quick survey. And notice the kind of victory side of things, conquering the
Enforce justice and promises.
put foreign armies to flight. Women receive their dead back by resurrection. And then,
Daughters are killed.
verse 36.
Who's he referring to there?
He's now sort of gathering up all of the history of God's people, and he doesn't really identify except to say, we could think about various times that the Hebrew people had been oppressed by other nations, and they were driven to live outside the city, and they had to fend for themselves out in the wilderness and living in caves and just doing the best they can, and their sufferings. Some are tortured, as it describes there.
Doesn't that describe what happened to the Maccabees? Tortured, refusing to accept release so they might rise again to a better life.
Well, but then again, the Maccabees are also the ones who led the revolt and, put foreign armies to flight, right?
I know, I'm just saying that those are some of the people that he could be talking about.
He's just asking people to realize all through, this is God's faithful people. And we can see them in the scripture.
I can't think of any story in the Old Testament where someone was raised from the dead. Were there examples?
Yes. Again, oh Lord help me. Isn't it Elijah in 1 Kings with the widow?
Well, the widow's son, right?
Son. He meets the widow. Her son is on the funeral pyre and they're going to
and he lays on top of them.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that would be one.
I couldn't think of anything, and I was trying to figure out what it was referring to.
Right. Okay, but the thing that I'm kind of driving at is a little bit like Abel and Enoch, right? So for some, faith looks like it turns out the way we want it to, right? Victory, conquering, miracles, great life. And for some, faithfulness means suffering, torture, death. They're both faithful. They're both participating in the reward, right? Because they believe this They believe God and they do what God says. So the writer's being very realistic about this here, you know, based on the history of God's people. He's being very realistic. It's not always going to be a kind of happily ever after story. But God approves of the faith of people even who suffer. And this, again, doesn't.
Well, and a list of these guys, a list of these people that are so perfect still allows encouragement for us who are also not perfect, but God honors them.
Right. Right.
It feels a little bit like I think that we can get caught up a little bit in our daily failures, you know, or even our reoccurring sin. And that takes up all of our attention as if we're on a roller coaster with God. And these people were far from perfect and they were commended. So it's almost like, I don't know. I think God, maybe it is that God sees our lives as a whole instead of as a
Well, and
fluctuating.
I think that's right, but I really think what the writer has been trying to do all the way through this book, he's trying to get us to focus on the kind of God God is. So here's a God in all these cases, right? You can go back and look at this. Well, God says to Moses, I've seen the suffering of my people and I have come down, right? I'm coming down to deliver them. And he comes to us in Christ, and Christ walks through the human experience. So here's a God who is with the people, and faith then really becomes this kind of radical trust for good or what we might think of as ill, right? Come what may, you know, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Our God can deliver us, but even if he doesn't, we're not going to bow the knee to Baal or to the idol. Okay. So we're getting into, those verses from chapter 11 that I've listed there, they all saw something better. And they were willing to endure, this is an important word that gets us into chapter 12. They were willing to endure whatever because they knew there was something more than just the normal day-to-day worldly kind of stuff. So let's go, because I know I gotta stop it. 12, 1 and 2 kind of caps it off in a way. Since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, and that great cloud of witnesses is the people he's been talking about. And we could add in some other people, right? There's a cloud of witnesses. We could add in others, but let us lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so closely. And here I think the sin is specific and maybe general in another way, but he's really talking about the sin that is at the door, crouching at the door of these people who are thinking about, I'm going to give up on this, right? It's too much pressure. It's not working out. I'm going to go back to the old way. That's the sin that he's really concerned about. And let us run with perseverance. So if you go on and read in chapter 12, you're going to see two words that get repeated. You're going to see discipline and you're going to see endurance or perseverance, endurance, discipline and endurance. So run the race with endurance, looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter. So we can go back to chapter 2, verse 10. He is the pioneer of our salvation. So Jesus has run this race, right? He has run this race. And now he rules. And so we'll have to unpack that next week, but this, all of chapter 11 is to get us to just hang in there, run the race with endurance, keep the faith, right? See this reality that really governs and guides everything. That's the something better. Don't give up on that vision. You know, stay steady. That's That is the point. Wow, thank you for the extra time. One more Thursday on Hebrews, and then we'll be 2 weeks off. We'll have a break of 2 weeks, and then the first Thursday in June, which is 2, 3, I think it's the 5th of June. Is when we'll meet again.
What did you say you were planning? I remember you talking about it, but not exactly what.
Well,
We can,
I'm gonna blame this on Larry Newton. I think Larry said something about.
Larry said the Reformation,
Yeah, and that got me
And then,
thinking about
yeah.
the
earth. That the Reformation might come later.
right. We need to kind of set up things for the Reformation, right? So we're probably gonna do, we will be in the Bible, but we're gonna look at an early part of church history. To see how what we find in scripture starts to sort of mesh and merge into the kind of beliefs that the Christian faith has about the nature of God as Trinity and things like that. So we'll do some work with that. And part of that is just we're gonna be in Turkey looking at all these things. So yes, Jim.
That's after a good trip report, right?
Yes, yes.
Well, the trip is definitely gonna provide a lot of meat and resource for the next class.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll see you next week.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.